Here's something that should bother you. We live in an era where every square meter of the Earth's surface has been photographed from orbit, where ground-penetrating radar can map what's underground without touching it, where DNA extracted from a 50,000-year-old bone fragment can tell you which population the person belonged to. We have more tools for understanding the past than any generation in human history. And yet there's a clay tablet sitting in a museum right now, cataloged, photographed, accessible, that points to a location in Central Asia where something was found, classified, and sealed. Where the local population carries genetic markers from a civilization that should never have reached them. Where villagers perform ceremonies in a dead language they don't understand, have never understood, and have been performing for 4,000 years. We have the tablet. We have the coordinates. We have the DNA. We have the Soviet classification records. And the cave is still sealed. That's what this video is about. Subscribe. We cover the history that doesn't make it into textbooks every single week. Tablet K.3657. Excavated from Nippur, ancient Mesopotamia, modern Iraq. Dated to approximately 2400 BCE. The British Museum holds the original. A near-identical copy sits in Istanbul. For most of its time in museum collections, it was filed as mythology, a text describing the Sumerian underworld, spiritually interesting, historically unremarkable. Case closed. Except the scholars who filed it as mythology made one assumption that nobody questioned for decades. That when ancient people described a physical location with precise measurements and navigational landmarks, they were speaking metaphorically. That precision was poetry. That specificity was style. That assumption is wrong. And tablet K.3657 is the evidence. The Sumerians described a place called Kur, not the land of the dead. That's a different category in Sumerian literature, and the distinction is clear in the original text. Kur here is physical, geological. A location beneath the surface of the earth characterized by three things: great underground waters, permanent darkness interrupted by stones that produce their own light, and a sky that curves downward instead of upward. That last detail is the one that exposes everything. A sky that curves downward. For generations, this was read as poetic inversion, the underworld as mirror of the heavens, sky flipped, everything reversed. Elegant metaphor. Except if you have ever stood inside a cave chamber of significant height, with mineral crystal deposits embedded in the ceiling, that is exactly what you see. A curved surface above you, glittering, arching down at the edges to meet the walls. A sky that curves downward. The Sumerians weren't writing poetry. They were writing field notes. They just didn't have the word for cave dome, so they used the word they had, sky, and added the only modifier that made it accurate. The tablet gives three navigational landmarks, three specific, verifiable geological features that together identify one location. First, the mountain where the sun is swallowed. Every translator for a century read this as sunset. The sun swallowed by the western horizon, a poetic direction marker. But the Sumerian verb being translated as swallowed carries a second meaning, enters, goes inside. The sun doesn't disappear behind this mountain. It enters the mountain. A cave opening oriented at the precise angle to allow sunlight to penetrate deep into the interior at a specific time of year. The mountain doesn't block the sun. It takes it in. Second, the river that flows backward into stone. Rivers don't reverse, except when they do, in tidal bore conditions where upstream pressure exceeds downstream flow. But into stone is the key phrase. This river doesn't just reverse, it disappears. A surface river that flows into a cave system through limestone and continues underground. Stream capture in geological terminology. Documented, mappable, geographically rare. Rare enough to be a landmark. Specific enough to be a navigation point. Third, 7 days' journey from the land where bronze is born. Bronze is tin and copper. The Mesopotamian Bronze Age was entirely dependent on tin imports from Central Asia because the region had almost none of its own. The ancient Bactrian production zone, modern Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Western China, was the source. 7 days of travel from that zone through mountain terrain. One geographical corridor. One destination. Overlay all three against the Bronze Age tin trading routes, confirmed by clay tablets from the Sumerian city of Ur, describing merchant expeditions of months through the lands of many mountains. And the convergence point is unambiguous. The Fergana Valley. Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. Bronze production center. Trade route waypoint. And home to a cave system that matches every single geological feature the tablet describes. The Kani Gut Caves. The Gateway Cave, in local Tajik tradition. The entrance sits at the base of a mountain whose orientation allows sunlight to penetrate deep into the cave network during the summer solstice. Once a year, the sun enters the mountain. Inside, an underground river flows through the limestone, and due to pressure from a massive subterranean lake deeper in the system, that river reverses direction twice daily. The cave walls carry selenite crystals and fluorite deposits that luminesce in darkness. Early explorers describe the effect as standing beneath a ceiling of cold stars. Permanent darkness, broken by stones that produce their own light. Every landmark, every single one, matching a real place that was demonstrably connected to ancient Mesopotamian trade. This isn't symbolism. This is a map that is 4,000 years old and still accurate. Now here's where the story shifts from impressive to something harder to categorize. Soviet geological teams explored the Kani Gut system in the 1960s as part of a resource mapping initiative. The cave extends at least 14 kilometers in mapped sections. Acoustic surveys suggest it continues much deeper. The chambers grow larger with depth, some estimated above 300 meters in height, calculated acoustically because no modern team has physically reached them. What the teams found in the accessible upper sections, remarkable geology, significant cave formations, nothing unexpected. What they found deeper in, Bronze Age pottery, tool fragments, and carved into the cave walls at approximately 1,500 meters below the surface. Symbols the survey team couldn't place in any known local cultural tradition. The symbols were Sumerian cuneiform, not influenced by Sumerian, not stylistically similar. Actual cuneiform script in a Central Asian cave system, thousands of kilometers from the nearest Sumerian city, carved by someone who knew exactly what they were writing. The Soviet government classified the discovery and sealed the caves in 1967. Official justification: geological instability. Documents that emerged after declassification in the 1990s describe a different picture. The teams hadn't only found inscriptions. In the deepest chambers they accessed, they found constructed architecture. Walls of cut stone blocks with precise right angles. Channels carved into the cave floor, consistent with a water management system. and a circular stone platform at the center of the deepest accessible chamber, surrounded on all sides by Sumerian text. One member of that geological team described the final chamber in detail in an interview given shortly before his death. A stone archway, manufactured rather than natural, carved with a single symbol repeated at intervals around the entire frame. The Sumerian cuneiform character for Ker. Beyond the archway, sonar returned a reading the equipment wasn't calibrated to process. Not a chamber wall. Not a passage terminus. A void. Boundaries in no direction. Seismic readings suggested the space extended kilometers beneath the mountain. The team was extracted. The caves were sealed. The documentation entered a classification system where it remained for 30 years. And here's the detail that I keep coming back to. The thing that makes this harder to dismiss than any of the archaeology. The classification didn't leak. For 3 decades, nothing came out. Not through journalists, not through defectors, not through the informal channels that usually erode Soviet-era secrecy over time. Whatever they found was significant enough to hold. The genetics tell the same story from a different direction. A 2019 study published in Nature tracked genetic markers across Central and East Asian populations and identified a population anomaly in communities near the Tian Shan Range around 2400 BCE, precisely the period of tablet K.3657. This wasn't a population collapse from disease or famine. The genetic diversity shifted. A portion of the population left, remained somewhere across multiple generations, and returned with the same base markers but different mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA is maternally inherited. Different mitochondrial profiles across generations means children were born somewhere else, from different mothers. The population went somewhere and had families there. Modern genetic surveys of villages in the Fergana Valley nearest the Kani Gut entrance found markers with no match in surrounding regional populations. Not Uzbek, not Kyrgyz, not the mixed Silk Road profiles typical of Central Asian communities. The closest match is ancient Mesopotamian DNA from Sumerian burial sites. And critically, these markers don't follow the trade route. They don't thin out with distance from the cave. They concentrate at one point. The entrance. This pattern doesn't describe trade. It describes residence. People living near a specific location across enough generations to leave a genetic signature. The village of Kizil sits closest to that entrance. Every generation, certain families conduct a ceremony at the cave mouth during the summer solstice. They travel into the upper cave chambers. They leave offerings, bread, salt, bronze objects. And they recite phrases in a language none of them speak, none of them have ever spoken, none of them can translate. In 2015, a linguistic anthropologist recorded these recitations. The analysis came back unambiguous. Archaic Sumerian. Prayers addressed to the dwellers of Ker, requesting safe passage and protection for the village. The ceremony has been performed continuously for long enough that the language became sound without meaning, preserved perfectly in form, emptied entirely of comprehension. 4,000 years of oral transmission. The words outlasted the understanding by so long that no memory of understanding exists. Think about what that means. These people have been saying Sumerian words at a cave entrance since before Rome existed. Since before Greece existed as a concept. Since the Bronze Age was still underway. And they are still saying them. The tablet also describes a requirement for entry into the deeper sections. purification of the blood. Most scholars treated this as spiritual preparation, ritual cleansing before sacred space. A 2021 study on high-altitude cave atmospheres provided a different reading. Deep cave systems have measurably different air, elevated CO2, altered oxygen levels, in some formations significant radon concentrations. For travelers coming from near sea level Mesopotamia into cave systems at 1,000 to 3,000 meters, then descending further, the physiological stress is real and potentially fatal. Altitude sickness. Hypoxia. The deeper passages would filter out anyone whose body couldn't handle the atmospheric transition. Purification of the blood was selection. Only those already adapted, already carrying the physiological capacity for high-altitude, low-oxygen environments, could make the full descent safely. The Sumerians documented this by watching who returned and who didn't, without any biological vocabulary to explain the mechanism. They encoded the observation as ritual. It was actually physiology. Modern populations in the Fergana Valley carry the EGLN1 and EPAS1 genetic variants, the high-altitude oxygen processing adaptations that define Tibetan biology, at concentrations above the surrounding regional average. The cave selected for these traits across generations of contact. The people who could enter Kher were the people whose blood was already right for it. In 2018, an independent research team accessed the Kanigut system after Soviet-era seals had physically degraded over 5 decades. Local authorities permitted limited entry. The team reached 2.4 kilometers before encountering a blockage, stone, placed deliberately, not natural collapse. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed the blockage was approximately 6 meters deep. Behind it, the cave continued. Without excavation equipment, the team couldn't proceed. But in the sections they reached, Bronze Age material, Sumerian cuneiform on the walls, 800 meters from the entrance, and inscriptions that matched K.3657 with additional content not present in the museum copy. Warnings, passage-specific navigation instructions, and a phrase that modern cave explorers recognize without needing a translation: the breath that steals life. Carbon dioxide pockets. Oxygen depletion. An ancient safety protocol carved by people who had learned, some of them fatally, what the cave would do to the unprepared. The excavation permits that team applied for remain under bureaucratic review. The region is remote, politically complicated. The archaeological case has not been sufficient to move the funding. So the cave sits sealed. The tablet sits in a museum. And the villagers of Kaiseljar perform their ceremony every summer solstice, saying Sumerian words at a Sumerian location for reasons their ancestors understood completely and they have forgotten entirely. What's on the other side of that deliberate blockage, 4 kilometers into the mountain? The architecture the Soviet teams described, the circular platform, the void that sonar couldn't map, remains unknown. Maybe it's Bronze Age mining infrastructure. Maybe it's a cave system so large that 1960s equipment couldn't handle it. Maybe it's something the Sumerians called Kher, and the Babylonians called the Deep Foundation, and the local tradition calls the Door of the Deep Ones, and none of those names are mythology. All of them are attempts to name something real. The answer is 4 kilometers underground. Behind placed stone. In the dark. The tablet knew where it was. We know where it is. And somehow, that's not enough to open it.